All right, so we have just got finished on testing Summer Helm, and I had to kind of find a boss where I could actually use her. And we found like a dummy EX stage, chapter 21. The boss is weak against iron, so we managed to kind of just test different teams out. I had to kind of scuff my units a little bit, remove their gears and things like that, just to kind of test variety of teams. I had my Summer Helm at 174. Now, obviously, she'll do more damage with the higher skill 1, but I don't personally see upgrading it more than skill level 4. It is pretty much yeah. Right now she is a DPS, obviously, that we can take advantage of, but her primary thing is the skill 2. This seems kind of like pretty good, but just at the end of the day, it does cost a lot. So what are the chances of us like investing too much on the other skills, right? So her main identity, the way I see it, is one, she has a skill cooldown, but this one doesn't scale based on level, so it doesn't, you can just keep it at level 1, and like the cooldown on the burst skill is still the same. And then the skill 2 is, this is her main identity, which really gives additional damage taken on based on the boss, as long as they belong to electric code. So the good thing about it is it doesn't have to be iron. So as long as the boss is under the electric code, your units don't have to be iron, right? So you could be like using Noir, for example, or Scarlet against like a boss that is electric, and they will deal more damage thanks to Summer Helm. So here are pretty much like our kind of preliminary conclusions. We have done more testing with litter, different teams. Well, not different teams, but it was like Novel, Summer Helm, Rupee, and then I did other B2 testings as well. And I had to switch out of litter because my litter was kind of dealing too much damage for her own and the team wide buff. So I had to kind of nerf it down a little bit. So yeah. And if anything, TLDR, she is a very mid unit. I don't see her being raced by other people than like other than like super min maxers, and it's really at the end tier end, and I'll show you later how she was like kind of like making it up. But as of this moment, so this is kind of how it's showing up. This is the team tests that we did. I had to do multiple attempts because it was like kind of like the damage was just not consistent, so I had to kind of attempt multiple times. But on a constant DPS team, Summer Helm was dealing more damage comparatively to Novel, obviously, and to Rupee, and that's because like she has other buffer. She has a litter buffer, so with litter buffer, she does end up being dealing more damage compared to like Rupee. But I would say that that's like the main comparison. How about with blank? So I tried to switch around different time with the different, and I tested with Summer Helm, blank, Novel, Dala, Rupee, and so what ends up happening is like Summer Helm ends up being let's damage here is she is about second place just before blank. So blank and Noir still blank still comes out on top. I have a DPS comparison here where the DPS like total DPS and then DPS without the burst 2 damage. So I've tried to remove the burst 2. And that's because like for example here, my Rupee is core 6, and so she was carrying majority of the damage here. Meanwhile, so I tried to remove the damage on B2, and as it turns out, yeah, Rupee ends up being like one of the worst buffers, right? And Novel just kind of come close. And that's because like a throughput DPS where majority of your damage doesn't necessarily come from like that window, that small window of like 5 seconds after you do a full burst. That's kind of how I see it. So think of like Scarlet, for example, Modernia, where majority of their damage come from like throughout the time, not only just during burst. So in this situation, Summerhelm does come out second, just below Blankenor, and so she does come out on top if we have to ignore Blank, and because Blankenor is pretty OP, and it makes sense because her buff lasts for the entire duration. If you can keep up the buff, which is like if the enemy doesn't really spawn any mobs, right? This buff damage taken has would have 100% uptime. So it would make sense that she would come out on top as a B2 buffer. In terms of her damage, it actually is not bad comparatively compared to my other units, because like my novel has is core 7, dollars like core 7, I think. Yeah, and Rupee is core 6, so it was like it makes sense. So her damage as a B2 is not actually that bad comparatively, since I only have LB0 on her and I only put her as 174. If I skill up the other skills, it would definitely deal more damage. But as you can see here, Blancanor just deal buffs the team way more compared to like volume, or sorry, S Helm. So that's kind of how we see it. And then the next one is really probably the more point of comparison, which is like, what if we're using the Iron Team comp, which is the Iron Team comp is Litter, Novel, Maxwell, Snow White, and Yulha could be the last one is very flex. So whenever you have Litter, Novels, Maxwell, Snow White, Maxwell, the last one is flex. For the last Union raid, I used Modernia, so which doesn't really buff anyone, and I also used Yulha as well. And then, so basically, how I kind of view it is Summer Helm could be a substitute for Novel, or she could be a unit that will actually be a fifth flex unit instead. And overall, basically, how much damage increase does she really give to the team, right? And I did some kind of overall calculation on just the burst. In the Snow White Maxwell team, majority of your damage comes from Snow White and Maxwell. And so I kind of like just snapshotted the damages on that and how much she would actually affect on it. And as it would see, so assuming that you have like Litter, Novel, Maxwell, I was doing like 14 mil. But if I added S Helm with max S2, the damage increase is just about like 17%. But then when you compare it with Yulha will damage increase up to 42% in this team. Now, this is also with my Maxwell at 30% attack overload. So you can kind of imagine how much diluted the attack percentage already with Litter and Maxwell, and then also Yulha. That is a pretty fairly diluted attack percentage. But you can see that Yulha will still come out like she will still buff the damage by that much, right? It's still 42%. That's just how crazy Yulha is. My Yulha, by the way, is at max skill too. So, like, just this is just for comparison. But here's the thing, right? Summer Helm is a 100% uptime. Meanwhile, Yulha is only a every 30 seconds buff. And so this is where I think Summerhelm will come out on top. If Summerhelm ends up doing a buffing all the time, then I think like her overall damage will come out above Yulha's. So here's the thing. This is an example. This damage stuff here is what I had last Union raid with against Sinister. And I tried to calculate also how it would affect if what if I had Summer Helm, because it's pretty easy to calculate Summer Helm's overall damage into that equation, right? And as it would come out, like I would think that Summer Helm is actually going to be a bigger damage increase because of just she has way more uptime throughout the full fight. So if you have two invested units, then Summer Helm will come out on top of Yulha. But if you have like one DPS unit that is like strong, then I think Yulha will come out on top. But yeah, it is pretty hard to differentiate test right now for me because I have like there's really no good boss to test it on. But the way I really see it is I can kind of just extrapolate the kind of like the damage. Now yeah, so I had a fight where I used Yulha the entire fight, and this is what their damage came out to be. And then I had a fight where I did not use Yulha and I just used Modernia. And so since Modernia doesn't really like give attack buff or anything like that, she gives hit rate buff, but then that's doesn't really like benefit that much on these. So I can remove Modernia and then like imagine what if I slot in Helm, Summer Helm on it, and it does come out. They do come out on top, and but then there's like damage difference. So what it's gonna seem like is maybe they might come out equal, but I guess one thing that's different is Summer Helm will deal more damage also. So I think this number will definitely be bigger than just like 1.2 versus like this one, which is like 1.17. This is 1.23. So how I see it is overall, it seems like you're not gonna get that much damage increase. So if you have like an invested Yulha, then you could just use Yulha. Here's another thing also. This Summer Helm is very restricted to just the electric bosses, right? And you're not always going to be using the Snow White Maxwell into a boss that is electric boss, right? So because if the boss has multiple body parts, then you could also use the Snow White Maxwell as well. So yeah, overall the way I see it is she is very restrictive. Here's some TLDR. I know some people were asking about like quick TLDRs, but I had these were the units I had. I didn't test with my guilty because my guilty was overloaded with a bunch of like max ammo, and she was like skilled up maxed. She's just gonna destroy them. But just compare it to Rupee. Obviously, I had a core 6 but no OL Rupee. These three doesn't have any OL. I have OLs for these, but their damage is pretty negligible. They're defenders, right? Like, so personal DPS, I would say like Rupee and Summerhelm actually just ranks out roughly equal the way I see it. And then obviously Blank and Novel are just like they're defenders, so they're down there. This is their personal DPS, but the overall team DPS on a constant DPS, like think of like Scarlet, Modernia, things like that. Blank will come out on top against like the electric boss, and then Summer Helm after that. And then Novel is roughly equal to Rupee. It really depends on like the rest of the team composition. Like for example, if you don't have any other attack buffers, then Rupee may come out on top instead of Novel. So there's just they would be roughly like question mark roughly the same. But if we're just looking at burst DPS, so specifically Snow White and Maxwell, which is really kind of like our point of contention here, because that's really the only Iron team that is kind of viable right now, then it would be Novel is better than Blank, is better than Helm. But something to keep in mind is when you're using Blank, there is no flexibility on the fit position, so that is just something to kind of watch out for. And for example, you could just use Yulha instead or someone else, right? Like, basically, there's just different like flexibility that you could use for this. When you decide to add Summer Helm instead as a fifth flex unit, because her skill 2 is not really, it doesn't require her to really burst, right? Like as long as she is there, she exists, she will continuously debuff the enemy. Then I would say she actually just come out roughly equal with Yulha. Summer Helm is probably better than Yulha if both of your DPS are strong. But if you're leaning towards one side, like for example, your Snow White is much more invested compared to your Maxwell, then Yulha might be a better option instead. And yeah, and another thing again is like the very restrictive part on it is she is limited to electric code. The restrictive part on Yulha is you have to time your big DPS burst. So your, for example, your Snow White burst, you have to time that every 30 seconds. So like you need to time that. So yeah, that is basically kind of like the TLDR on Summer Helm. Very mid unit. I would probably just get one copy, and the main reason for that is probably just to flex her for solo raid because of the cooldown burst skill. But I also kind of foresee more units to end up being released also. So overall, not a very must unit. That's kind of how I see it. Get one copy if you want to be flexible on solo raid, union raid, because yeah, we do, there are some again, right? Like we do see that she can be better if again with like a team that is like more throughput, and but again, this is against like a boss that is just electric, so it's very restrictive, not worth the money for a lot of you. And I think she can be skipped if you don't really care about like collection or limited units. But overall, yeah, just spend it on Summer Anise instead. All right, that's about it. Good luck, gamers.